when I first got my first record deal, I went out to Willie's studio out at Pedernales, and Pootie was there. And Pootie, he knew me already. Like, in fact, when I told him I got the gig playing on the Waylon record, he goes, "Waylon who?" They all did that. That was the one thing they all said was Waylon who. And then the other thing they said was when they asked them who their favorite country singer was, all four of them in the Highwaymen would go, "You mean besides George Jones?" It was just a stock answer. They probably said it 20 times a week, you know, because they got asked that all the time. Pootie goes, "Well, do you got some good songs for your record?" And I go, "Oh yeah, man, I got plenty. I got 30 songs. And he goes, "Well, my boss is the greatest living songwriter, and he doesn't do all his own songs on his record." And I was like, it just, you know, such a big knowledge drop, mic drop, you know. So I called Jim Lauderdale, like all young, you know, guys do. They call Jim Lauderdale.
You were around Willie a certain amount also.
Yeah, I got to play with him, and I got to do Poncho and Lefty on his guitar with him and Johnny Bush. And I got to do some cool stuff with Willie.
Describe for the viewers, people who have never got to hold trigger in their hands, what's...
Terrifying. It's terrifying.
Did it play well?
Yeah, it played amazing. It was another one of those old guitars that you felt kind of breathed when you played it. I got to play one of Segovia's guitars one time. This really rich collector guy had one of his guitars, and it felt like, you know, you play it and you could just feel it vibrating your arm like other guitars didn't. But yeah, I mean, Willie's got the greatest jokes, you know. I think that's why he's so sharp, like at this age, because that guy can remember a lot of jokes. Well, Willie told me this joke. This guy goes in, he's really old, and he's going in for a checkup, and the doctor says, "Well, you know, you don't have a lot of time." He goes, you know, been around for a long time. He goes, "You know, what you could do is, you know, maybe sometime during the day, if you could just go out in the backyard and just get some dirt and just kind of pat it on your face." He goes, "Dirt? Why am I putting it on my face?" He goes, "It'll get you ready for the inevitable." It's like dark, man. You know? But his daughter Amy knows a lot of jokes too. She's really good at it.
When you're playing Trigger, were you playing it through that Baldwin amp? And,
Let me tell you a story about that Baldwin amp. I was at Willie's recording, and I had this gig at this music conference in Nashville. And I had Kenny Aronoff playing drums. I can't remember his name. Great bass player, though. Like, tried out for the Stones when Bill left, like that kind of level. And I didn't have an amp. And they said we could bring stuff with us on this flight if we had flight cases. And so I tried to get, and the producer said, "Just take one of the amps over there. It's totally cool." And they had all these nice, beautiful vintage amps. So I tried to take the one that was the least cool, and I took the Baldwin. And Merle Haggard shows up that night wanting to record. And Willie's Baldwin amp is in New Orleans. And the next day, we go back to the studio, and Willie's there. And he's in the kitchen. He goes, "Did you take my amp?" And my heart just sunk. I was like, "I didn't know it was yours, Willie. I was trying to take the one that was the least desirable." He goes, "Oh, that's the most desirable one." He goes, "Haggard came in last night and I had to record on another amp." I said, "Willie, I'm so sorry. It was a complete mistake." And he looked at the case that I had it in, and it was an old wooden case, and it had this big thing on it that said Willie Nelson for president. It's from the 70s. And he goes, well, that case looks like it's pretty beat to hell. He goes, you want that case? And I go, yeah, I'd love to have that case. And so I still got that case. Probably about 20 years later, I see him walking up on stage. And he goes, is my amp up there? He remembered. He smiled real big like he does. Coolest guy ever.
Were you ever around Billy Joe Shaver much?
A bunch. He was on this label that he did this record called Shaver with him and Eddie. Tramp on Your Street. Shaver was the name of the record. Okay. It's a desert island record for me. Like, it's up there with Slim Harpo, and it's, you know, Dylan or whatever. It's like, it's one of the greatest records I've ever heard. And I ripped Eddie Shaver's guitar licks off, like, to this day. I will be playing them tonight. And because Eddie was a monster, you know. Eddie grew up like Dickie Betts, you know, showing him stuff. And but we were on the same label, and I had already heard that Tramp on Your Street. And we got to do a bunch of shows together. When Billy Joe Shaver died, I went to Home Depot to the garden center, and I'd never built a fire pit before in my life. And I got out all these big ass bricks that they had, and I set them all out like I was going to do it at the Home Depot, so I knew that it was right. And they're like, what's this dude doing with all these bricks, you know? These big old bricks, you know? And I had it about up to here in a perfect circle, and I was like, okay, that's how many I need. And I went back to my house and dug a hole and built the Billy Joe Shaver Memorial Fire Pit with tears in my eyes. And I was very upset when he died. I was more upset. You know, sometimes you're more upset than you think you would be, you know, and that was one of them. And, but, you know, I was there for Eddie's funeral, and, you know, it was, I mean, he's really one of the great, all-time great songwriters. I mean, you know, and I got to be around Townes and Guy, and I love them, and I love their folk influence, and I love that. But Billy was really the real deal outlaw country songwriter. He was real kind to people if he saw something in you. You know, I would see him walk up to strangers and just go, hey, brother, I'm Billy Joe Shaver, and put his arm around. He's a real gregarious Texas, you know, guy. I mean, he was, you know, Billy Joe Shaver could kick your ass, you know? Well, he didn't want anybody smoking in the van. So there's a few guys that got punched because they didn't know. So there was no, you know, you could have told me first. There's none of that.
You know, smoking Billy Joe's van.
No. I remember when we were getting on the Outlaw Cruise. I think this might have been the first or second one, 8 or 9 years ago. And Jeremy Tepper, rest his soul, probably my biggest supporter ever in the music business. He comes on to this. He goes, man, you're not going to believe this. I go, what? He goes, Billy Joe just fired his whole band out in the parking lot in the van and turned everybody around and said, fuck it, I'm going home. I'm going back to Texas. He never got on the boat. Now, that was not a good van ride home. He was pretty good about telling me stories, too, when it was just me and him, and about things that happened and, you know, the way it went down, his version of it, the way it went down. And he was also very, very, you know, he had a broken heart over Eddie passing away. And Eddie got, you know, mixed up in, you know, the lifestyle. And so I would see that sadness in him after Eddie passed. And then we kind of lost touch for a while, you know. And he kept going back and forth to Brenda. I remember I was in the studio with Johnny Bush one day, and I said, "Did you hear the big news?" And he goes, "No." I said, "Billy Joe just shot some guy." And Johnny Bush goes, "Well, did he deserve it?" And I was like, and I said, "Yeah, he went out to his car and got his gun." Johnny Bush goes, "Jess, we've all got guns." And it was just that old school country mentality. Of course, they all didn't, but in his mind, they did. But I heard one of the reasons why Billy Joe got off is because they didn't have Jesus Christ and Elvis walk in and give him a hug in front of the whole courtroom, but they did have Willie and Robert Duvall. And they had Dick DeGuerin, who was one of the great lawyers from Texas.
I think it shows Willie in a beautiful light when Eddie died, that he had Billy Joe come play on New Year's with him just to make sure he wasn't alone. All I know, I got to play with Willie on New Year's. Me and Ryan Bingham did. And Ryan Bingham calls me up and said, "You want to come play guitar for me? I hear Billy Gibbons is going to be Willie's guitar player." I was like, "Oh my God. Like, that's just, I can't even handle this." Because I'm such a huge Gibbons fan. I mean, born and raised, soundtrack of my life, first 5 records, you know. And but I was around Willie, and Willie was always very inclusive. And, you know, they're really sweet guys. You don't write stuff like that being an asshole. You got to be vulnerable and kind of show a vein and wear your heart on your sleeve. But I knew that they were very close. And the thing that most upsets me about when the guys pass away, like Merle passing away and Billy Joe Shavers, I feel sorry for Willie because he's here without them. And they passed away. They don't know, you know. So it's, you know, I don't know what happens when you die, but I know the ones you leave behind miss you, you know.